expands freedom and the CSA limits freedom. So the CSA, you know, is cracking down on immigrants and banning Muslim countries and you know, trying to throw transgender folks out the military and thinks Black Lives Matter is a terrorist organization. And the USA, you know, gave folks the right to get married. Made a lot of people kind of think that we were a post-racial society because we had a Black president for the first time. And so it's had kind of a profound effect on me in terms of how I see things. You know, we made it over about 3 years. You know, my man Mark von Schlimmer, who's on here somewhere, yeah. he was a good brother to help me with it. And it was a kind of a community effort. I never had a budget. I shot it for about $40,000. Took me about 3 years. Wow. And then I got to Sundance with it.
How did that happen?
Well, you know, it was one of those, you know, godly moments, man, where I was at KU where I teach, University of Kansas, and someone in the theater department she said, I heard about your film. I have a friend of mine that's involved with film. You know, her name is Liz Mann. And I sent her the film and she loved it. And she was kind of a producer's rep. And she helped me get it into Sundance. And we sold it at Sundance. And I took the money that we sold it with and I finished the film.
I don't think that's unusual.
No, I don't think that's unusual. I think when we sold it, I think they knew I was going to take some of that money and finish the film with it. But yeah, it was, you know, it was quite an adventure. And the movie ends with, you know, a coda about Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when, you know, that just happened, last week, right?
Yeah, and they finally, you know, and the thing I always tell folks is that, you know, because I see people post on Facebook things like, well, if maple syrup offends you, you got a problem. And not understanding, you know, the whole point is that uncle and aunt are slave terms. They were house slaves. They called them uncle and aunt because, you know, the masters that owned them didn't want to think of them as slaves. They wanted to think of them as family members. Even though if they got out of line, they got sent down river and were dead. And so, you know, it's just part of the whole history of the stuff that Americans don't know much about that defines race in the country. And, you know, people lost their jobs because they were in the film. I could tell you stories about that.
People lost their jobs because they were in the film?
So the guy that plays Fauntleroy in the film, is Larry Peterson. He was a vice president at Time Warner in Kansas City. And they were actually honoring him at a media conference and showing clips of his movies. You know, he's an actor too on the side, and he was in a lot of different films. And they showed a clip from CSA, and the people there were so offended that they fired him. And I could not explain to them enough. I wrote Time Warner. I pleaded his case, but you know, it shows you kind of how race works in the country in terms of they would rather just fire him than have a discussion about race. And I tried to explain to them that, you know, Larry was acting, that guy Hannibal Lecter in the movies, he's actually not eating those people in the movies. You know, that he's an actor, you know, that it's called acting. But you know, corporate America is just, they'd rather just get rid of your ass than have a discussion about race.
So how did you hook up with Spike Lee?
Well, it was actually from that film. So you know, I like to tell the story. I sent CSA to my agent at the time, and he said, so what do you want me to do with this? Just like that. And,
very comforting.
Oh yeah. So what do you want me to do with this? So like the next week I got into Sundance and he said, Kevin, you're a genius. and Spike heard about the film, and wanted to see it, and I let Spike see it, and he loved it, and he wanted to support the film, and so it's presented by Spike Lee, and that's really kind of how we met. And then he asked me, "Do you have any other scripts?" And I had a script called "Gotta Give It Up," which was based on the play Lysistrata, and we tried to get that movie made for about a whole year, and couldn't quite get over the finish line. And then he called me about 15 years later and said, "Do you still have that script?" And I said, "Yes, I got it." He said, "Let's set it in Chicago and call it Chirac," and it became the first film for Amazon Studios. It was called Chirac. And since then, we've been working together.
So how does that work? Because I mean, it's that's a very different way for doing a film for Amazon than it was taking $40,000 of your own money and trying to pull a bunch of people together.
I didn't. Spike directed the film. I just
wrote it. Right.
Yeah.
But so, what was it like? I mean, that's a writing for a different canvas. I mean, that's working a bit differently. And how did you and Spike start this kind of writing working relationship?
Yeah. Well, I always kind of wrote for the big canvas. I wrote that film in hopes that I could, sell it to a big studio. So that was, that had its own little, so I write sometimes for low budget when I'm going to make the film myself. And I'm kind of writing for the budget I have, and I'm making choices based on what I think I can get done, and then I write with the studios in mind, which, I don't restrain myself at all. And so that's kind of one thing I do. And I think, when I'm working for Spike, obviously I'm writing for the studios. And so you've got that in mind from the very beginning. But basically the way it works is that with BlacKkKlansman and the Five Bloods, both of them were rewrites. And so there was existing scripts that we rewrote basically. And so with each of them, what we do is that he'd bring me to he'd bring me out to New York to a studio, and we look at the existing script to kind of go through it, identify the stuff we like, the stuff we don't like, and then talk about kind of what we're going to do with the film, what we're going to do with the script. And in the sense of BlacKkKlansman, it didn't have much of a third act. So I really had to create a whole new third act, really. And then we just made a lot of different choices about the film.
So in BlacKkKlansman, was that first script from the author of the book, or was that first script for something that somebody else had written before you got to your script?
No, it was Charlie and David. They were the two other writers, and they had found the book, and deal done with the book. And so when Spike and I were brought on, Spike was brought on to direct it, and I was brought on with him to rewrite it. So we rewrote most of that script. And with the Five Bloods, it had a really fine script to start with. So what we did with that though was I joke with with the other writer about we just kind of blackified it. We just kind of we just made it a black film. We just made it a black story, and there was originally just one black character in it, and it wasn't about the black experience in Vietnam. And so when I work with Spike, typically we're always looking to really make it a black film.
So you want to talk about that? So who are the two guys who made the original script, and how did it end up in Spike's hand?
So it was Danny Milson and Paul DeMaio were the other two writers, and they had made a deal with Lloyd Levin, and Lloyd had contacted Spike about maybe directing it, And so that's when we first looked at the script. It was called, the original script was called The Last Tour. So we looked at it, and basically we kind of assess it and see if what we can do with it, if we can turn it into kind of a Spike Lee joint. And can we tell, the story? I think immediately from the very beginning, we saw this as an opportunity to tell the Black Vietnam story, that the Black Vietnam story had not really been told. And it was a big gap there. Most of the great Vietnam films have Black characters in them, but it really isn't about the Black experience really in Vietnam. So we saw this as an opportunity to really kind of do that. And so that was really our major point.
I mean, it seems to me, yeah, indeed, in getting that sense of the Black experience, there was the character of Stormin' Norman in the original script, because his articulation of his philosophy, money is war, war is money, and why are we here when we go back home? I mean, to me, that's kind of like the core sort of essence that drives the movie, aside from the characters and the sort of plot that's going on. And did you guys come up with that, or did you embellish what was already there?
Well, in the original script, it was more about their kind of beloved squad leader, but what we did was we created flashbacks. Yeah. Because Black squad leaders were kind of rare in Vietnam, and the whole point of Stormin' Norman was how beloved he was, and we really wanted to get across that camaraderie and that brotherhood and that love that these guys had for one another, and that's where the whole term Bloods comes from, is that brotherhood. And I grew up in a small town in Junction City, Kansas, which is adjacent to Fort Riley. And as a kid, I saw all these soldiers going to Vietnam, and I saw the dap handshakes and the love and camaraderie, and they would call each other Bloods, and we called each other Bloods, as kids. And so that was really, Stormin' Norman's character really, represents that brotherhood and that love. And so it just demanded that we do flashbacks, really. So that brought out that whole, and then we added the whole thing that he's a philosopher and that he teaches Black history, because Black is Beautiful was just becoming a thing then, and Black history was just becoming a thing at that time. And so we added all that to the mix to kind of make him be this beloved philosopher leader that when he dies, it's kind of like the heart of the Bloods is now gone.
It's the political consciousness as well as everything else.
No doubt about it. And that's was a big part of what it meant to be a Black soldier in Vietnam. The whole thing is that they're fighting for rights they don't have themselves, and a war that's unpopular. And the thing that makes this war so different than the other wars where Black soldiers have fought is that while they're fighting in Vietnam, there's a war going on back home for civil rights and for Black power. And that had never happened before. And so that really generated different feelings than Black soldiers really, I think, ever had before.
Which gets me to Hanoi Hannah, is that her name?
Yes.
I mean, I knew that was sort of a thing, but to specifically bring it to why are you fighting here when you need to be fighting at home? And was that, again, in the original script, or I assume that's something that you guys brought to this?
Yeah, we brought that out. I think she's mentioned in the script maybe, but we put her on the screen and wrote scenes about her. And in my research, I mean, that's what they called her, Hanoi Hannah. And, she was like a Tokyo Rose of the Vietnam War. And they specifically often identified and really kind of targeted Black soldiers because they knew Black soldiers were in the middle of this really horrible conflict in terms of being pulled so many different directions. And when Dr. King is killed while the war is going on in Vietnam, there was a lot of conflict between white and Black soldiers at that time. And, we go back to the Confederate flag. I mean, there were a lot of Confederate flags in Vietnam, and racist white soldiers are telling the Vietnamese to call black soldiers niggers. And we have that line in the movie where the Vietnamese had never heard the word nigger, but it was taught to them by white soldiers. Right. And so they're in this whole difficult position of trying to serve and follow orders, and at the same time being pulled away because of their feelings about how unfair the war is and how unjust things are back home.
How much research did you do? Because you didn't serve in Vietnam, did you?
No. I was a little too young.
Yeah.
Got it.
So what kind of research do you do on something like this?
Well, the fact that I grew up around all that stuff really helped a lot. So I really had these guys were in my neighborhood. The Buffalo Soldiers were in my neighborhood and on my block. So I grew up with all those guys. I had cousins that fought in Vietnam and neighbors that fought in Vietnam. So I had a real sense of their attitude and the way they saw things. Typically what I do is I do real targeted research. So as I'm writing the script, if there's something I need to know more about, I will look for just those specific things about whatever the issue is I want to know more about. And so, for instance, with Hanoi Hannah, I found actual recordings. We found actual recordings of her, and other kind of propaganda that talked about my hometown, because the Big Red One was right in the film, and the Big Red One is in my hometown. And so they knew that Hanoi Hannah and the propaganda knew that a lot of these soldiers, the last place they had been was Junction City. So they would go from Junction City to Vietnam. And so they would talk about Washington Street in my hometown, and don't you wish you were back on Washington Street eating dinner at this place and having lunch at this place. And it was amazing the specifics that they knew about in terms of what was going on back home.
One of the other things about this film is it's so, there are a lot of cinematic references throughout, and particularly in the beginning, a lot of Apocalypse Now, like that, the banner in the bar, and then the amazing use of the Valkyrie music in a not very dramatic scene, which is just, it's kind of like absurdist almost, but it seems in a sense a very conscious way of recreating identity of what a war movie is and what a war movie talks about and the cultures within the war movie. Do you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, that's interesting. For one thing, the Apocalypse Now bar, that's a real bar in Vietnam.
That's what I heard.
That's a real disco in Vietnam, and the other two writers had written that location in the film, so we kept that and just really kind of changed things a bit with it. Spike really loves to homage things.
Yes.
Danny and myself and Spike are all college professors. We all teach at film schools. Mm-hmm. So I think that's part of it. One of the things that Spike liked from the very beginning was the connection to Treasure of the Sierra Madre.
Right.
And the whole thing about gold fever and how gold changes folks, and it really connected to the other big theme in the movie, which was the brotherhood and the camaraderie thing, and that this gold is reparations that we should be giving to our people. And that's so much a 60s, early 70s idea. I mean, that's the kind of thinking that went on back then, as opposed to now, which would never be about, let's give the gold to the people. It's like, let's all get down to Walmart as soon as we can with this damn gold, right? So that really kind of exemplifies one of the real points that we try to make in the film about the difference of attitude from back then and now. But yeah, Spike loves, anytime he can homage a little something, he loves to do that. And I think we were conscious also of other Vietnam films, obviously. And we have a little section in there where we comment about Rambo and Chuck Norris movies. And that was kind of intentional in terms of kind of how America tried to refight the war in the 80s with Reagan, and in hopes that we could win again, or that we could win, period. And how problematic that really was.
The flashbacks. Did you and Spike talk about like having them shot in 16 millimeter and not de-aging them? I know that's more of a Spike thing, but how much in terms of the script, in terms of the way in which they're portrayed, which is, I think, is really kind of brilliant, in a way of sort of thinking about the past, like that.
Yeah, well, from the very beginning, Spike said he was not going to do the old age makeup or do the special effects and make them young. Mm-hmm. And so, we immediately started to think about kind of more philosophically what that meant. And I put a lot of lines in the script about how war never ends and how kind of war ages with you. And there's several characters in the film that kind of talk about that kind of philosophical idea that so that the only guy that's young is Stormin' Norman, who died. Mm. And he's permanently at that age, but the memory of war, it's not just something you remember when you're young. You're going to remember that when you're 75 as well. And that 75-year-old memory of war is going to be just as disturbing as it was when you were 20. And that's kind of the notion of that. And, Spike just, doing his thing, he told me he's going to shoot the flashbacks in 16. And he's always looking for the right medium to capture the essence of whatever we're trying to do.
Some of the others, sort of stories interest me. The Hetty story with the Lamb organization, was that in the script, or is that something you guys came up with? Because it seems that in the beginning that it's kind of like this, turn a little bit, and which of course comes back near the end. But I thought that was like just a different kind of look for the story, a different angle.
Yeah. That was in the original script, and we just kind of adjusted it to kind of fit what we were doing with the movie. But I think for us, we tried to do was center her character into the imperialism of the French, and that it kind of every kind of character in the film has been dominated and oppressed by somebody, and that's kind of the one of the big themes that connects everybody in the film. But those kind of organizations do exist. They go out and they in any of the war-torn areas of the world, they're there trying to recover landmines and bombs that have been unexploded. And so we just really embraced the reality of those groups, and wrote a character to kind of wrote her character in to really kind of capitalize on that.
And then the whole story of Tien and how that character, I assume that was in the original script as well.
Yes.
And I thought that was really great, near the beginning, and then to end it off, I thought was really, kind of powerful.
Well, I grew up with a lot of folks like that in Junction City. A lot of Black and Vietnamese kids in my neighborhood. In fact, the daughter is named after a girl I went to meet on. And I have another friend that her father never told them that he had a child back in Vietnam, and it was many years later, like 40 years later, that they reconnected, and so that's a very, Danny and Paul, that was one of their choices, and it's one of those choices that just really goes with war. They're just going to be war orphans there, and children of soldiers that get left behind, and that's just a big part of what war is all about.
And speaking of names, is it a coincidence that the name of the Bloods are the names of the first names of the Temptations? And whose idea was that?
Oh, that's a Spike Lee thing. Yeah, he was, that's the kind of stuff he likes, little tricks like that you gotta kind of dig and find a little bit.
So somebody here said, can you discuss the process of developing and embodying the motif within story structure? That sounds like a question for a script writing teacher, which you are.
Well, I'll take, for instance, the MAGA hat. Which has a lot of symbolism in the film, and typically for me anyway, when we made the choice of making Paul a Trump supporter, and then putting the hat on him, then I, as the script develops, you've got this thing that we know as a culture is just got power to it, yeah, and symbol to it, and that people bring their own understanding of what the MAGA hat means. And for me, it's a Klan hood, and so and I knew Spike would understand that, and so the whole notion of how the hat is transferred around in the film. It was really kind of a horror movie motif. And so for me, it was just a nice comment to make on the whole world of things, the real point of the film, that the points that are coming across. I don't think you can start out with that. I think you have to kind of, stumble on those opportunities and then hopefully identify them and capitalize on them when they're revealed.
Yeah, I thought the scene when he first pulls it out and puts it on, is so powerful, because these are guys who are really, really close. And, what is the worst symbol that somebody could pull off and believe? And how does that change your sense of closeness? I mean, if you had an old buddy that you hadn't seen in 20 years and they had that hat, how does that change? Can you be close to somebody who has a hat on like that?
And I've got a lot of buddies just like that. I mean, guys that I haven't seen for 30 years, and I find them on Facebook, and now they're MAGA guys. And you just go, what the hell happened, dude? But I think that's one of the big points of Paul, is that we made him a Trump guy because the way Danny and Paul kind of wrote him originally was, kind of a racist guy, a guy that's got a lot of grievances. He's got a lot of pain. He's got a lot of
Rambo.
Yeah, he's kind of violent and just a loose cannon, and it just seemed to totally fit. I mean, that was just like, if putting him in our world, he would be a Trump guy. And the fact that he has got all these problems but won't get help, the fact that he won't go to counseling, he won't talk to others. I think in real life, I think that's a big problem with the Trump people, is that they grab onto racist points of view because they feel they've been wronged by the world and they've been screwed. Paul talks a lot about, all the people that have screwed him. And it's those grievances that really speaks to and Trump capitalizes on.
Yeah. And in a way, you push people away. So much of the power, aside from the great script and the film, comes from his performance. And like, what is that sense of what you write and what he brings, and where is that kind of balance? Because you're both a director and an actor and a screenwriter, and how does that all kind of work in your head?
Well, I think, when you're not directing the film, I think your job is just to try to create the opportunity for a great performance. And, one of the great things about working with Spike is that I know he's gonna help them deliver that. And how he helps deliver that is he casts Delroy in the first place. I mean, that's where it starts. And he knows Delroy. He knows probably how Delroy is going to play these scenes, and he knows the power that Delroy has. And so, really, it's like what so many other what Altman said about working with actors. 90% of it is in the casting, and so really you kind of start there. But then my job just kind of becomes as a writer just to make sure that I'm giving them the opportunities to do their thing and to capture this thing that I know, he's going to probably capture. And so you're playing. I didn't know Delroy was going to play that part, but I knew someone like Delroy should play that part. And so you're playing it in your head the way you think someone like Delroy will play it. And that's kind of an unspoken thing that you have with someone like Spike, the director. I mean, we don't talk about those things. We just kind of know how those lines are going to sound and what the attitude is going to be, and how this will play at this section of the film, hopefully. And that's kind of what you're banking on. And fortunately, Delroy just took all that and just took it to another level. And so much of it is about the fact that Delroy is such a great actor that he takes that material and then he just turns it into something that it's hard to even recognize how great it is.
So is there something that you wrote for this that got cut out that you really miss?
Well, there's always a few lines here and there that you miss, there was one line about that thing I told you about where I was trying to set up the metaphor of how war ages with you. There was a really good, I can't even remember the line now, but it was a pretty good line. But the thing I was pleased was that it shows up in other places in the film, that there's similar lines to that. But as a whole, I have no real qualms. I mean, it's usually there's some baby that gets killed along the way that you're going to be crying about. But fortunately, there were no dead children on this one for me. Anyway.
Tell me about the scene about My Lai, because I thought that was just really kind of the way it was brought in that discussion was just kind of an amazing way, that whole discussion, the way that played out.
Yeah, that was Spike on that one. And he, when he kind of wrote that, I didn't totally understand how it would play. I was so caught up with the we don't need no stinking official badges. Yeah. I was I was kind of stumbling on that line a little bit, but it works really great in the film because of his use of the still photographs, and because the still photographs are kind of all through the movie. I think that probably works. It's one of the biggest payoffs is in the My Lai scene, and I think part of it is because we haven't seen some of those photographs before, and a couple of those photographs, the horribly graphic ones, they kind of fought him on having in the movie, and he fought to keep them. And I'm really glad he won that fight because, the graphic thing about war is that you don't, obviously you're not trying to exploit anything, but you don't want to sanitize it either. And really My Lai more than anything now is history. And it is something Americans should know and should understand and should recognize. And hopefully we made them feel a little bit of it. And so that's always part of the goal, I think.
It's almost forgotten history. I mean,
yes, indeed it is. I think most people, if they saw those pictures online, they would not know what incident that was.
Did in one of the great things about Spike's work, and this in particular, is, as you mentioned, these images, these archival images that sets up everything that goes on. Do you have any input onto that? How does he think about that? Can you know about his process of doing that?
Well, I think, you know, the title sequence, we didn't really talk much about. It's not really a title sequence, it's probably an intro sequence, really. Yeah. Where there's a lot of documentary footage and stills and stuff used there. I knew it was going to be something like that. I knew, I think, you know, I think that's one of the last things he probably does in terms of you edit the film, you get a rough cut of the film, and then you kind of see what the point the film is really making. And then you do something like the opening sequence, because you want that opening sequence to kind of inform the rest of the film, and I think it really does. I mean, opening with the line about the line from Ali, you know, really kind of sets the whole conflict about being a black soldier and being a black, you know, citizen of America, and that turmoil we've been talking about.
So, being that this was made for Netflix, did they have any problems with much of what you wanted to do? What was it like working for a major studio like that?
Well, you know, I mean, I wasn't there for everything, but from everything I could gather, they gave Spike, you know, room to do his thing. And I think, you know, when you go down a road like this, you know, they gave us script notes and things like that. They gave us notes, you know, when we did test screenings, they would give us, they would be there to give us notes, to give Spike notes. But as a whole, I think in the end, and some of those notes, I know he applied and changed things, but I think in the end it was his cut, and I'm sure he has final cut, and so I mean, I think it's his film. I mean, everything is how he wanted it.
Do you have any influence in the use of music in the film, which I thought was incredible? I thought the scored music is just amazing, and the Marvin Gaye music is also, I think, really, really powerful throughout, both in its time, the way it's used, what's going on, about camaraderie, what people mean to each other. All of those lyrics like have something completely maybe different from what was originally there, but really solidify the dramatic scenes that are there.
Yeah, definitely. From the very beginning, he said, before when we first started writing the script, he said that we're going to use the Marvin Gaye album, What's Going On, and the Marvin Gaye album was going to be the soundtrack of the film. And that was really great, because we wrote scenes to that album, and so that was one of the funnest things I've ever done in terms of writing with music. I mean, you know, typically you don't get to have that great of an album, you know, to just write scenes to that in a movie. It's just, you know, you're hoping that you write a scene and you know, you either, if you're directing, you got the money to put a great song in, or they'll find, you know, if it's for someone else, they'll find some great music to go along with it. But his music supervisor is really terrific. Yeah. And so that's another part of it. And of course, you know, his composer is terrific as well. And so, you know, music is a big part of things, I think, for Spike. And but I think the Marvin Gaye album in particular was important to the film, because Marvin Gaye's brother was in Vietnam, and Marvin Gaye's brother was writing him letters about what he was experiencing in Vietnam, and that's where that album comes from. You know, and so that song, What's Happening, Brother? I mean, that song, I think, is probably the best song ever in terms of capturing what it was like to, not just for Black soldiers, but for anybody coming back from the war and trying to you know, reacclimate into society again, and the difficulties of that, and they literally, you know, we have that scene in the film where they're singing that song themselves.
Yeah, they're all singing it.
Yeah, they're all singing it. And you know, when I was a kid, my brother had that album. I grew up with that album, and that album has been one of my favorite albums of all time. And you know, you just grew up hearing those. You know, it's one of those albums where you know the lyrics. You really can sing along with it really well, and you know what the lyrics mean. And so all of that just gave, and I think the audience, so much the audience knows that album too, and knows what those lyrics mean. And so, and the ones that don't have kind of, I think, got to experience something new, which is kind of hip in itself.
Yeah, hopefully you sold some records off of that. Right. So it's a good time to ask some questions. I know some of the rest of you have some questions you want to ask. I'm sure, Mark, you have a question.
I have a question. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I was also just thinking again about archival footage and the way Spike uses it. Charlotte at the end of Klansman. I mean, this is not my question, but I'm curious, was that kind of thrown in at the end, or was that thought through?
Well, the joke has always been that you know, David Duke kind of wrote himself into the film, and so the reality of it was that when Spike was editing the film, Charlottesville happens, and the young lady is murdered, and David Duke is there, and he is promoting, you know, hate, and I call him King Tang. You know, Trump is saying that there are good Nazis and good Klansmen on both sides, and so when you're making a movie about hate groups and the Klan, and David Duke is the main character, and he's in Charlottesville, and the president of the United States is supporting the Klansmen and the Nazis, how can you not put that in the film?
Right.
And so literally it was not so much us as much as it was, you know, David Duke and Donald Trump that wrote the Klan into the movie. So, both being card-carrying members, by the way.
So my question was really about the Bloods. So and it was a point at the movie, and I really liked the film. I loved it. I was with it all the way. And then something happens that took me out of it for a second. And it's when they've been marching through the jungle, and they get to the spot by the river where they think they want to search. And one guy has to go take a dump, and he goes with his shovel to dig a hole, and he just happens to hit the treasure box. So that's a stretch. I just wanted to know, when that was written.
Mark, you didn't have to go to the bathroom when you were in Vietnam?
But was that thought of as a stretch in the script?
You know, I think I don't remember writing that. I think that was kind of one of those things that happens when you're on set. But you know, I'll tell you a quick story. One time I was in New York City, and I was in the subway about 2 o'clock in the morning, and a friend of mine who I've been visiting said, now no one's going to be in the subway. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, so you be careful. So I'm down there in the subway, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and no one's down there. And suddenly a guy shows up, and then he starts staring at me. And it's just me and him down there. And then suddenly he starts walking toward me, and I'm going, oh shit, here we go. Let me get ready. And he walks up to me and he says, Kevin. So, you know, I mean, how would that ever happen, right? And he was an extra of one. He was one of my extras in a movie I made in Kansas City.
It happens.
And so, you know, it's like, you know, I know you're not supposed to put coincidence in film, but coincidence does happen a lot in life, really. And coincidence, when it comes to kind of the special thing, kind of the miracle things in your life, a lot of times it is coincidence.
Yeah. Hey, Kevin, thanks for coming to Dallas tonight.
Thanks, man.
Marianne, I think you had a question you wanted to ask. Marianne, are you there?
I mean the one I wrote in, that I wrote in. Oh, okay. Now I got to find it. Oh, so I really loved. I think you mentioned this before, but the older actors playing their younger selves in the flashback scenes, but for so many reasons. And though I've seen it a couple of times, I've never seen it work so well. Was that written that way, or was that decided with you and Spike in conversation?
No, that was always the original intent. I mean, Spike said that from the very beginning, that he wasn't gonna, and I think, you know, part of it was a practical reason too. I mean, if you're gonna do the special effects, you know, make them young stuff, that costs a lot of money. And so, so I think, you know, so from the very beginning, I started putting lines in the movie that I'd hoped to kind of justify that choice. And I'm just so glad you think it works.
Yeah, and I think for me, at the time, I was thinking it was a great way to highlight Chadwick Boseman, you know, this huge star, who, and certainly to so many younger film audiences, and yet he was their hero, and he was their, you know, he educated them. He was part of the Black Power movement. So I love that kind of also a film reference for me, since Spike put so many film references in, and there we have it with the Black Panther being for Black pride and for reparations. Yeah. So
no doubt. I mean, he brings all that to the movie, just being Chadwick Boseman, right? So yeah, no, you know, and I think a lot of times, you know, casting can work that way. I mean, it's a weird thing like that you know actors from other movies, and they kind of represent certain things, and fortunately, I think it worked to our advantage.
So somebody was asking about the Spike Lee shot, you know, the floating, gliding kind of shot.
Yeah.
If you know that you're going to have one, do you write something in that you know he can do, or does he just looks at the script and says, "That's where I put it"?
I think he looks at the script and says, "That's where I'm putting it." No, I've never thought about that. I don't think about it. You know, it's not even a concept for me. I don't think it was a concept for, you know, anybody else. But and it's always a surprise where he does it. And this one, I thought it was the perfect place for it. That it's clearly a thing he does. I mean, he's kind of known for that now. Yeah. But I think he also knows that when he employs it, that it's got to work. And so it was. I'm glad to see it work that well.
So after the script is written, how much of a role do you have? Did you get to go on location at all? Did you get to go and see some of the edits? And what kind of input do you have as, I mean, I think you're more than a writer because you've worked with Spike a bunch now and he trusts you. So how does that work? What your influence?
Yeah, well, I was there for about a week in Thailand. It was shot in mostly in Thailand, a little bit in Vietnam, but I was there for about a week in Thailand, and but I could have stayed as long as I wanted. I could only stay a week, and it was great. I mean, you know, it's you know, I didn't have to. You know, sometimes you got to work when you go to a set. I didn't really have to work, you know, which is the way I think most writers like it. You know, we just want to go and watch.
Stay up all night and rewrite the scene.
Yeah, we don't want to do that. No, we don't want to do that. But then, you know, they're editing as the movie's being shot. Yeah. So I would go with Spike to watch the edits, and he's always very generous about asking my opinion, and so he's very respectful in that sense. And so I feel comfortable, you know, I usually don't have to say much. I mean, a couple times I've given my opinion on certain things, but as a whole, you know, it's all Spike.
So Kevin, what is one note you gave him in editing that ended up in the show?
Well, it wasn't so much a note as much as there was a scene that was added. That takes place at the end that I thought really kind of hurt the rhythm of things, and I think a couple other people gave him that same note, and he took it out. But that's just part of the creative process. I mean, you know, I work with, you know, Mark von Schlimmer. I don't know if Mark's still there or not, but you know, that's, you know,
I'm always here, Kevin.
Hey, there he is. You know, that Mark, you know, when you've got a great editor, a director, you know, is going to incorporate their thoughts. They're just not there to you know, punch buttons. They're there to share things. And obviously Spike's got his own ideas and his own vision of things, but I think he's always looking to get feedback, and he takes feedback really well, I think.
Linda, do you want to ask your question here? You have to unmute. Linda, you need to unmute.
There
Okay,
you go.
sorry, it took me a moment there.
Okay, there we go.
To ask you about one thing was amazing to me in this film is all of the intentionality in it. I mean, everything from the music, the history lessons that are in it. I mean, even all the end with the Black Lives Movement and everything. But even the artwork. I mean, I know the film graphics were done by Emory Douglas,
Yes.
who actually did the graphics for the Black Panther newsletter.
Yes.
So, I mean, how much time does it take to really plan and conceptualize and go through this whole process of, I mean, there were so many layers and so much meat in this movie. It just boggles my mind to think how you put all of that together and the time that it may have taken to do that.
Well, I think a big part, well, thank you, but I think a big part of that, obviously it's Spike's vision, and with it being his vision, I think, you know, the movie's a 60s, early 70s film. And we're trying to really relate the Black experience of that time. And so, you know, the what we're trying to capture is actually a pretty small thing. And I mean, a small period of time, really. Right. But within that period of time, there's a lot of stuff. There's just a lot of history, a lot of important history, a lot of visual history, a lot of all those things that you're mentioning. And when you have the budget, which Spike did in this film, you know, you can really employ the people you need to really nail that stuff down. But it starts with understanding the look, understanding the period, understanding, you know, what you can incorporate to capture all of that. I think a lot of films have the budget to do those things, but don't know those things that you're talking about, don't know how to take advantage of all the graphics and all the things that are totally connected to the Black memory of that period. And it's specifically kind of the Black memory of the period that Spike is going for. And that, of course, connects to it being the Black experience in Vietnam.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was amazing. And that's my era, kind of, you know,
Sure.
all Marvin Gaye, the whole bit.
Yeah,
So
well, I think we all
really
grew up with that stuff. We all grew up with that stuff, and it stayed with us. I mean, it stays with us, and we know when we hear those songs, we go right back to when we heard them as a kid, and the visuals that go along with that, and you know, all of that.
Well, thank
So,
you.
Kevin, what are you working on now? It's time for you to direct something important for us. The moment is asking for you to do something.
Well, I have a new movie that's going to come out at some damn point here. I hope it comes out here. It's called The 24th.
Yeah.
And it's a Texas film, actually. It's about Texas.
Really?
And it's about the Houston riot of 1917. And in 1917, they sent 700 Black soldiers, Buffalo soldiers, to Houston, Texas to guard the construction of a thing called Camp Logan, which was to train soldiers to go to World War I. And the Houston police were just god-awful guys. And they brutalized these soldiers and brutalized them to the point where 150 soldiers marched on Houston, Texas, and went after the police.
Wow.
And it ended up in the largest murder trial in American history. And this is where I came upon the story. There's one photograph of 64 guys on trial at one time in San Antonio at Fort Sam Houston, and at a thing called Gift Chapel there. And there's this photograph of all of them on trial together. And that photograph just blew my mind. And so I researched it, and I actually wrote the script about 20 years ago. Actually, it's almost about 25 years ago now. And I couldn't get it made back then because, you know, black folks weren't hip yet. But fortunately, because you know, Netflix and Amazon and, you know, things that have changed, I was able to get a little bit of money. And so be looking for that. It's called The 24th.
So how far are you into this? Is it shot? Are you
It's waiting for a distributor right now. So hopefully it'll come out sometime this year.
So Kevin, can I beg you for a link to look at it?
Oh, you know, if I had one, I'd send it to you, Bart. But I don't own, this is not my film. I'm kind of a writer. I'm a writer director for hire here, unfortunately.
Okay.
And so, but as soon as I got one, you got it, buddy.
All right. Thank you very much. Well, we are at 8:30, and I try not to take any more of people's time. Kevin, it's so wonderful to, you know, this has just been really wonderful for me to hear all of this. The film is very powerful and meaningful to me and to a lot of people, and to sort of get an inside story of what happened and how that worked. It's just truly, truly remarkable. Thank you so, so much. I really, really, really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you, Bart, man. You've been in my corner for a long time. I appreciate you, buddy.
You bet. You bet. I am there for you. When the 24 is ready, I am there to sound the horn and go for it.
Very good.
Thank
Very
you
good.
all. We'll see you next week.
Thank you. It's great.
Thank you. Linda, good to see you.
Thanks, Bart. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Linda, good
you,
to
Bart.
see you.
Thanks, Bart. You can't see me, but it was great.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Linda. That was great. Thank you for coming. Thank you for asking
Thank
questions.
you. I mean, we wouldn't miss it for the world. Thank you so much for doing
Thanks, Bart.
this.
I thought it was really great.
That was
Keep
good.
it up. Keep it coming. It's wonderful.
I know you did great work, Bart.
Very, very
Want to be you when I grow up. What can I say?
too.
Well,
Yeah.
doing Q&As is something I do well. It's
Yes.
I think I learned some things tonight, so that's good. Gotta incorporate some of those questions, Bart.
Yeah, you can
Oh.
bill us later though.
and I'm happy to come out and do them for you. This is, you know, it's what I do. Nilu, it's great to see you. Gordon, good to see you. Alan, good to see you. Even though it says Cynthia, I know the difference. Be well. Ted, why don't you show us your face? Who disappeared? No, he's still there. Ted, there you go. How are you?
Good time. That was really interesting. Sorry, I was working in Venice while this was happening.
Anyway, I thought that was really great. I really
It
enjoyed
was
it.
really good.
I actually want to go back and watch the film again.
And I want to see this new film that he's working on.
24. Sounds great. Yeah. Indeed. All right, guys, I'm going to go eat dinner.
Woohoo!
I'll see you all later.
Ciao.
Thank you. Thank you.
Stay safe. Ciao.
Ciao.
Bye,
Hasta la
Bart.
vista, baby. Okay, I can say end meeting.